All right, that should be good. Now try this. All right, good. We got
Yeah.
them. All right, cool. Class, as you know, we've been looking forward to Dr. Moore coming on. Chris, we met a long time ago. I think it was probably ACSM like 25 years ago or something.
Yeah, something like that. No, it was a very long time ago. I think I was still in grad school at that time, I believe.
You were. I think we sort of came up the tracks together in
Hmm.
bases, but we've always crossed paths one way or another over all these years. And Chris is and has always been one of the go-tos for like practical. How do you apply what we're learning in the textbook to like an actual human being? So I really appreciate his perspective on this, which is what you guys need to know, right? Like, how do you take what we're learning in here and actually use that information? And that's led to Chris having several amazing opportunities um, professionally to work with some cool people. We talked about LL Cool J when we were texting this morning. Um,
Hmm.
you were on some of those talk shows for a while in that circle. So maybe for the class, Chris, you can just walk us through like how you got to where you are now. And we can take a few minutes on that before you get started here. And then we'll move right into your talk from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love kind of talking about the journey because it's very atypical for a lot of people in the field, dietitians or what have you. Educationally, my background is in nutrition, as a dietitian, and then also I have a PhD in exercise physiology. And my personal interest was always, growing up as an athlete in high school, and I was just interested in nutrition myself, and specifically in supplements. There wasn't as much research as there is now going on, but I was always interested in that area and thought that that would be a really cool career is to kind of study supplements, talk about them, and so on. And went into school for that specifically for nutrition, and then had some opportunities to be a sports nutritionist and help out with that during graduate school and learn some more tips and strategies and tools of working specifically with athletes. And then after I did my master's and became a dietitian, both in nutrition, I thought, not that I knew everything about nutrition by any means, but I thought, maybe let's mix it up a little bit. I wanted to get some background in exercise physiology as well to really complement those two areas. So shifted gears a little bit and focused on that during my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh. And to be honest, there my research really shifted from nutrition specifically into behavior change and a lot around weight loss, actually. Um, but still always had those roots in nutrition and always interested in writing for magazines. And I used to love to read magazines. And I used to look at who the writers were. And I connected with many of them who Mike and I both have now worked with in some capacity. But they, fortunately, some mentors kind of helped me get into that space a little bit, writing for magazines. And it started, 30-ish years ago is really when the internet was really kind of coming about. Started doing a lot of online blogs and writing for magazines, and fast forward a few years and had the opportunity to was invited to be on the advisory board for Men's Health magazine. And then fast forward to now, that contract ended, and I was actually invited to be on the advisory board, actually with Mike, with your professor, for Men's Fitness magazine. So again, a lot has happened in between those two things, and various talks around the world, fortunately, and then working with some cool individuals and some fun opportunities. I worked with the Cincinnati Bengals for a long time as their sports nutritionist, and then also got to work with some professional wrestlers, which was kind of a fun, very unique audience as well, and a unique type of athlete. Um, One of the opportunities, so you brought up in my quick introduction, was the opportunity to work with LL Cool J, and I wrote a book with him in 2006. And again, that came about, admittedly, through my work at Men's Health magazine, and one of the editors there was brought on to work on that book. And when he was talking to LL Cool J and his trainer about presenting some of the people who may do the nutrition part of the book, um, they seemed to gravitate towards me, and of course, my work with the editor helped as well. So, funny story about that. One was a great experience and very cool. So I wrote the nutrition component of his entire book. around, like I said, it was 2006. And very cool, very, very cool guy, works tremendously hard, which was also encouraging for me. He doesn't just look fantastic, but he works really hard at it. And I remember we were coincidentally, we are in the same city and he had a concert. So we went to see him. That was the first time I had met him backstage. And after the concert, it was late, I don't know, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. But didn't go out partying, hitting the clubs or anything. He literally went to the hotel gym and got after it. It was, like I said, the middle of the night essentially. But I really learned about, kind of saw his work ethic, which I appreciated. But a funny story. So the book finally comes out, and there was, because of him, certainly a lot of media around it. And it was in the middle of the winter at some point, December, January, I can't recall. But we were in New York City doing some media, and so he has several security guards with him, and there was a few of us, the other folks who worked on the book, and some of the PR team was with him as well. And he had a giant coat on, big hood up, certainly because it was cold, but also really not to just be stopped by every human being in the city because of who he is. But he could not get up by everybody. There was one woman who noticed it was him, ran up to him in the middle of the streets. Like I said, New York City, it was cold. It was maybe December or January, and said, "Oh my gosh, LL Cool J, you have the greatest abs. Do you mind if I lick them?" And I was like, wait, what just happened? Like, how did this go from a book about it, certainly about his workout regimen, to this random woman stopping him? And he did say no, but he did at least take a picture with her, which was very kind of him. But I have another, funny story. Things take different turns when you're doing various media. So you always have to be prepared for anything. But I'll save that story for a little bit further because it is specific around omega 3s, which is actually the topic today. Um,
Chris, that's awesome. I love the stories because what we're trying to do is introduce everybody to different types of speakers and key thought leaders in this space, and really a lot of it has to do with what do we do with our media presence, and how is that
yeah,
going to shape. And before there was a giant media presence, it was connecting through magazines and writers and like actually physically writing to them or email.
right.
So we were emailing them. I remember sending like 15 emails to editors to get to be able to write because I saw Chris doing it and I saw John Berardi doing it because they were like
Yep.
just ahead of me in this process. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that. So it's really cool to connect here on this. And I just want to, for the students' perspective, because we have several in here that are either research focused or on the RD track. And I
Hmm.
want you just in 2 minutes, how has the RD helped amplify your exercise fizz? I just want the class to sort of hear your perspective on that. And do you need it? Because we also have students in here who might be nutrition coaches but might not have the RD. So in what space is that really useful, and what spaces may you not need? Is there any kind of context you can provide there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I get that question so often. And really, you can translate the same thing to the PhD. Do you necessarily need a PhD? And I think for both those answers, it really depends what you want to do. So for me, being a dietitian has certainly helped in many capacities. One, I think in traditional media, specifically, with magazines or any other media, I think uh, people do appreciate that nutrition expertise, or at least, I mean, do you have to be a dietitian to have nutrition expertise? No. Does that certainly elevate, take it to one more level, so people at least have an understanding of your qualifications within the nutrition field. Again, many people have a wide variety of information about nutrition and expertise who are not dietitians, and that's okay. I think where it specifically, even more than that, helps is if you're working with clients one on one in some capacity. Certainly, when I was working with the Bengals, that was one thing that the strength coach was seeking, was a dietitian with with a sports expertise. So that for me was how the exercise physiology and dietetics degree came together. So in certain fields or certain capacities, I think it's very, very useful to have that. Um, it does give that extra level of qualifications. I think unfortunately now with the media landscape, social media, and so on, there's way more people who are talking about their nutrition expertise, but have zero background whatsoever being a dietitian or anything else. So I think it does elevate give you one more level of kind of elevation, really depending what you're doing. But the same thing could be said for my PhD. People are often thinking, well, you're not doing research because that's typically, or teaching in some capacity. And no, I have done research, and I did teach a sports nutrition class at the University of Louisville many years ago. But really, it's giving me, where it's helped me is giving me the ability to really understand research and be able to then dissect it and put it into to lay audiences' hands, whether it's magazines or what have you. So those are how those benefited me. I do want to say one more thing, Mike, you because you brought this up, and I kind of skipped this. I like fast forwarded my story of all of a sudden I'm on the advisory board for Men's Health magazine. It didn't quite happen like that. There was a lot in between that. In fact, I had the first newspaper I ever wrote for in graduate school. And I did that because I was thinking I need to make money somehow. I'm in graduate school. I'm getting a small stipend, which is fantastic. But if I can make some other money, that would be amazing. So I started reaching out to literally the local newspaper in Massachusetts. And it took several tries, a whole bunch of either no's or no responses whatsoever. But you can't get discouraged by that. Ultimately, fast forward, I did get a column in the newspaper, a weekly health column. At the end of the year, I got a letter from the editor who I worked with. Every single week, I sent her my content. She probably got it, gave me some edits, published it. At the end of the year, I got an email from her telling me that I was the worst writer she had ever worked with. And my column is no longer going to continue because it takes so much time for her to edit all my pieces. So keep that in mind as well. There's a lot in between the Men's Health and the beginning. I think there's better ways to approach, working with a young student, trying to help them out. But I now use it as fuel and like to continue trying as hard as I can to get better.
I love it, and I've got similar background stories, but that's really critical. You're going to hear no before the yeses start along your.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's jump into the omega-3 journey. We'll let you take it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So this is a topic I've been super interested in for a long time. And for me, again, this is going back to grad school, and my mom has high triglycerides, and naturally it's genetic, and that is how I first got interested in omega-3s. And I'll talk about how that plays a role in just a little bit, and you may be very familiar with it, but I started getting interested in that capacity, so learning more about them. Now let's just talk about some basics around nutrition specifically, and I like this thing called the Healthy Eating Index, HEI. Not telling you anything you don't know, that nutrition consumption affects health, right? About 60% of adults live with one or more diet-related chronic disease. And you can kind of see the spectrum here, all the way from 2 years old, all the way up to 60 plus, where we kind of fall within this healthy eating index. And basically, it's how closely things align with the dietary guidelines. So, putting us in the boat of kind of we're in that middle, that age 19 and up, this is on a scale of 0 to 100. We're not doing great. And now, people can argue with the dietary guidelines. Are there some pieces to that some people think should be changed or missing or so on? Sure. But in the grand scheme of things, we are so far off from what they are actually. If we made even just one positive change and followed a little bit of them, like eating more fruits and vegetables, for example, we'd be moving our way up this healthy eating index and making some waves and making some positive changes along the way. Now, there's more to it than just simply the dietary guidelines, though. Let's get into some specifics and looking at some just general nutrients that reduce the risk of chronic disease. Now, specifically around omega-3s, and I'll actually think about some of the foods on the left that provide those. So they'll use the term anti-inflammatory diet, so foods that can reduce general inflammation, and there's some even controversy around that, the idea of inflammatory diets. But omega-3s play a critical role in our overall health. Okay, not surprising. They're essential fats, essential fatty acids that we need to get from the diet because we don't make them in our bodies. So that being said, picking out a few of the foods on this list on both the left or the right, mackerel, tuna, salmon, sardines, all coming up, making their waves here in terms of the omega-3 space. But it's certainly also things like nuts, like almonds and walnuts. flaxseed, hemp seed, which those aren't on here, but those play a role as well when we think about omega-3s in the diet. Now, that being said, before I even get further than that, I'll ask a question to the group. So first, what is the recommendation for eating seafood every single week? Does anybody know what that is? The current recommendation, how much we should be aiming for?
Raise your hand, y'all. What do we see? Seafood. Yeah.
Anyone?
He said twice a week.
Twice a week, absolutely. Okay, twice a week. Now, that'd be great. Most people aren't hitting that. And here's the next question. Does anybody know when we look at blood levels of omega-3s population data, what the percentage of population is, men and women, who are low in omega-3s? What percentage of the population is low or not even meeting the guidelines around omega-3 intake?
Good question. Who's going to guess? We got 98% as our guess.
It is. It's right around there. So I've seen anywhere from 95 to kind of 97, 98%. So essentially everybody, right? With a few exceptions to the rule. So this is why this is so important. And I may not be telling you anything you don't know, right? But we need to think about what is the practical approach then when we're talking to people, right? When we're talking to clients, when we're talking to individuals, how do we make these additions to the diet? Because admittedly, I love sardines, but I know I'm one of a very few handful of people. But it's not the only source, right? There are any kind of seafood is amazing. Those fattier fish, salmon, tuna, et cetera, are the more popular ones, and certainly can play a role as well. But then, like I said, it's not just seafood. Obviously, if someone has an allergy, or if you have an allergy, or you don't like it, or you don't cook it, that's not a great option. So then we need to start to think about things like other foods, nuts, and hemp seeds, chia seeds, etc. Although, as I'll get into in a little bit, the omega-3s within those are a little bit different than the omega-3s within fish, and within seafood. So there's different types of omega-3 fatty acids. Again, I'll get into those in just a moment. Now, one of the just general dietary approaches I like, and again, this is there's a lot of diets out there, but people often ask, like, if you're going to recommend one diet, which I really generally admittedly hate, but I will say just a style of eating, I'd rather call it that, is this idea of the Mediterranean, I'll call it, style of eating. And one thing I love about this, nothing to do with omega-3s, but the whole bottom of the pyramid, which of course the US doesn't use a pyramid anymore, but the whole bottom of this one has nothing to do with food itself, right? You see general physical activity, you see connection, you see a family eating together, those types of things, which play a huge role in our well-being, of course. But then moving up the list, we have a variety of fantastic foods, beans and veggies and grains, which again, grains currently are controversial in some circles. Not in my circle, but they do provide great nutrition. And then moving up a little bit further, you see that whole kind of bar of different seafood, fish and seafood, which are of course amazing for you, not just for the omega-3s, but of course all the other nutrition they provide as well. So again, my take is if someone asks about a diet, it's this general style of eating, and then I actually did an article about this particular diet for someone, I can't remember who, to be honest. But what's interesting is there is some controversy around the Mediterranean diet, because the Mediterranean diet means a lot of things for a lot of different regions. The Mediterranean Sea, there's a whole bunch of countries that surround it. So depending where you are, whether it's Italy or it's another country kind of in the Middle East that surrounds it, then you're going to have different foods that are more available to you. But the key is going back to basics, lots of color, certainly some seafood, certainly a good amount of fiber as well. Now, admittedly, I'm going to skip this slide because it's, I think, too basic for where you are. We know that there are a lot of macronutrients, or a handful of macronutrients. There's some overlap between them. We're focusing specifically on fats, which are the largest form of energy stores in the body. Okay. And they make up cell membranes, about 60% of the brain. And now what's interesting is within that 60%, most of that is an omega-3 called DHA. So it's one of the omega-3s. It is particularly rich within the brain, which is one of the reasons that there's a lot of really interesting data continuing to grow and emerge, and that's already been done, looking at brain health from things like Alzheimer's to depression, to even some of the data around concussions and some of the potential benefits to elevated levels of omega 3s for reducing the risk of concussions. There's been some real interesting data around that area. One of the reasons, again, is because the brain is so rich in fat itself, but then specifically around DHA, one of those omega 3s. Certainly supports absorption of fat soluble vitamins, cushions organs. So fat is critical, right? Again, obviously too much can be dangerous. And I know there's a lot of controversy right now around the new dietary guidelines that are going to be coming out. So I'll take a step back here. They're updated every 5 years. You may know that. With the new administration, there's been a little bit of a change, and they are going to be updated. But there's potentially a big push to start shifting the focus on where fats come from and removing any guidance around saturated fats, actually. And some of the new discussion that they may go back to kind of saturated fats are fantastic for you. I won't necessarily go that far. There's a lot of data to show otherwise, but we do know that fats as a whole are specifically can be very, very healthy and are necessary for the diet. Most of the data continues to show that leaner fats, certainly omega-3 fats, polyunsaturated fats, and monounsaturated fats like those from olive oil and nuts and seeds and so on are fantastic for you, for your heart, for your body, for every cell within your body, to be honest. So let's dig in a little deeper to the types of fats here. So certainly we have, two big umbrellas, saturated fats and unsaturated. Now, saturated, generally speaking, most of the time are primarily are solid at room temperature. And you see some examples to the left there. There's others, of course. On the right, we have unsaturated fats, which then, of course, can be broken down a little further into poly and monounsaturated fats. Monounsaturated fats are things like nuts, vegetable, canola oil, olive, sunflower, avocado. Again, that's one example of a anomaly where it's solid at room temperature, but it's primarily monounsaturated fat. Now, of course, you've probably seen or been familiar with a lot of the social media push demonizing what they call seed oils, which is kind of a newer category of fats. It's not really new, but it's just a newly phrased term by some. And that's things like canola oil and sunflower oil and other seed oils per se. But I will say that the abundance of data continues to show that there are no detriments to eating those particular fats, those lower in saturated fats in the diet. Again, there's so much nuance with nutrition, and even what I'm talking about today, I think one of the most important messages around nutrition is that it's not black and white. There's always nuance, and it's that nuance that can get lost in translation, especially in social media. And that this is an exact example of the nuance that can get lost in translation. But those monounsaturated fats that I've listed there can be fantastic for you, especially when they're replacing saturated fats in the diet, or when they're replacing refined carbohydrates in the diet. So keep that in mind as we're thinking through this whole topic. Now, going a little bit deeper, again, it's not just the surface as the big term of fats or saturated, unsaturated. Then we have poly and monounsaturated fats, like I just said, and then you could break those up even further. So for the polyunsaturated fats, we have omega 3s and omega 6s. Both of those are considered essential fatty acids. Again, meaning we need to get them from the diet because our bodies don't make them. Then under the monounsaturated fats, we have omega 9 fats. Again, we can make those, but they are certainly critical and beneficial as well. Here are some examples of both of these types of fats. Again, just a few short list of both. So omega 3s, we have seafood and walnuts, flaxseed, chia, etc. For omega 6 fats, we have some more of those demonized seed oils, soybean, canola, corn, safflower oils. Avocado as well provides some omega 6s. Now, keep in mind that out of all of these, there's not one that I know to be like one fat, like avocado, for example, is not only providing omega-6 fats. It provides a variety of different fats, but the abundance of the fat, the fatty acids within the product itself are whatever I'm listing here, omega-3s, omega-6s, etc. All right. Now, this last statement is somewhat controversial as well, and there are some interesting studies to show that we're a little bit out of balance with our overall intake of omega-6s to 3s. This is partly where some of the seed oil confusion comes in, to be honest. Um, when you look at some data, we are eating more omega-6s than omega-3s. Now, even though they're essential, we're still getting them a lot more easily because of a lot of food choices that we generally make. And I'm using the term we, like collectively as a population. Whereas omega-3s, we just don't necessarily get as, most people don't get as many. As someone answered in the class earlier, about 98 or so percent of the population seems to have an insufficiency of omega-3s. So we need to make sure we're including more of those in the diet, bringing those up, adding more seafood, adding more nuts, again, flaxseed, all those things that I had mentioned earlier. And then considering an omega-3 supplement as well. This is one place where I think a supplement for most people would be beneficial. Questions around that before I continue on?
Supplement with omega-3s, what's the
Yep.
dose looking for, and or what what's the value in the blood that tells me I'm deficient that I should then start supplementing?
Awesome question. Hold that thought because I'm getting to it in the next few slides, actually. So
Awesome.
we'll get into that. We'll get into that exactly. So the benefits of omega-3 specifically, EPA and DHA, those are acronyms for big long words that you probably know. But certainly the heart, the brain, your overall mood, eye health, skin health, if pregnancy, and then infants as well, and even some data around muscles specifically. So those are just a few, a very short list. We can look at skin health, really every single cell in the body. It can uses and requires EPA and DHA. Now,
Chris, we
here's
got a
the
quick
general.
question.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Sorry, this is going back to the seed oil concept.
Uh-huh.
Um, but what is your opinion on that? Because I've seen a lot about them lately.
Yeah.
Um, do you
So,
see them as like healthy or like? Because I know like my parents were talking about that with me the other day.
uh-huh. Yeah,
And,
it's funny. My mom brought it up as well. So it's even making its way to our parents. Yeah, was that the end of the question, or is there something else?
well, I was just gonna also ask if like it's perceived as unhealthy by the public because of the inflammatory aspects of like omega-6.
Yeah, so I think it's perceived by the public to be unhealthy because of the media around it. That is where I think that's where some of the initial concern came from. Um, but as I mentioned, it's really nuanced. It's not as easy as those specific types of oils, canola, sunflower, what other the seed oils that aren't coming to mind, but anything that comes from a seed, essentially. Um, those actually can be really, really healthy. And most of the data shows that when you replace saturated fats with those types of oils, with the quote seed oils, that is a positive switch in your overall health outcomes from your heart health standpoint, and other components of your overall health. The other piece is not just saturated fats, but very often when the recommendation first came to lower saturated fats, and generally some that was, according to population data, was lowered a little bit. Unfortunately, people often replaced those saturated fats with simple carbohydrates, and that's not great either. When we replace saturated fats with the mono or polyunsaturated fats, which are those seed oils, you have positive health outcomes just period positive health outcomes. So that's what I would suggest. I think the seed oil data, or not even data, the seed oil alarmist the alarmists around that are very misguided. So I don't recommend necessarily limiting those per se. I do think we need to look at the quality of the overall diet as a whole. And I think there are some benefits to including those, or I should say, replacing more saturated fats with those.
I got a question too, related to the same topic. Because of the balance, I know you said not necessarily to limit the omega-6, and
Hmm.
all deficient in the omega-3s, or but most of us are deficient in the omega-3s. Do you think that because of the ratio, there is a potential benefit to decreasing the omega-6 intake for that balance ratio to have a positive benefit? Or do you think that the main goal should just be to increase our omega-3s?
I would say that for me, the main goal would to be increase the omega-3s. Now that said, if you're adding one thing to also keep your calorie balance in check, because that matters, you might be decreasing something else. So if you're making some positive switches within your health, I would definitely say that adding more omega-3 food sources is a great idea. If that does then correspond to decreasing some of those others, that's not bad. Um, so again, it really comes back to what else are you replacing. Both of those omega-3s and 6s are, quote, better than an abundance of saturated fats. So I think first I want to look at, let's add, like, where can we add more omega-3s in the diet and omega-3 food sources? Like I have on the screen right here, some of the sources here and others. Um, and then I would say that, maybe if you're the problem with seed oils very often is the it's not just those oils themselves, but often the foods that they're in. So it's not just that your people are blindly adding tons of sunflower oil to their food, but a lot of the packaged foods that we might eat might have some of those ingredients as well. So it's always, again, as I said earlier, it's always very nuanced. And I think limiting some of those packaged foods, those ultra processed foods, would also limit some of those omega-6s. And you also get some other benefits because generally speaking, most of those types of foods aren't the most nutrient dense anyway. Does
Hello.
that help? Yeah.
Uh, I was asking about the seeds oil again.
Hmm.
Yes, I have heard a lot about seed oils, cooking temperature, and the times we are frying things up into it. So, what are your views on that? Like, different cooking temperatures will be affecting different nutritions into those cooking oils, and what
Hmm.
the balance is.
Yep. So if you're talking about frying foods or just cooking temperatures, that's one of the things that's thrown out there a little bit is it's called the smoke point of the different oils. And I mean, avocado, for example, is a very high smoke point and is not actually a seed oil. Um, but yes, do you want to limit how much you're increasing the heat and making oils smoke because of that smoke point? Sure. But in general, fried foods aren't the best most of the time, anyhow. So hopefully it's not just that smoke point of the oil, but I think limiting those limiting those as a whole is a great choice because of the calories, because of because of the fat, not necessarily the seed oil, but just the overall intake in addition to the diet. There might be something through the rancidity of the oil to a point, but I often say to people that we're really kind of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies there. So we need to look at the big picture of the diet versus sometimes some of that little bit of nuance when we're thinking about making positive choices.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
So,
Appreciate it.
yeah, of course. We got a seed oil hot button here. I love it. All right, let's talk about non-seed oils. Let's talk about some omega-3s, which again, most people, we said about up to 95-ish%. This particular slide here shows 68% of adults have omega-3 blood levels below those associated with dietary guideline recommendations. But there have been some, as mentioned earlier, up to that 90 in the 90s. So I'll get to what those recommendations are and also a place that you can get your blood tested if you want very easily. But here are the recommendations. Someone had mentioned it earlier, eating 2 servings of fatty fish per week. General recommendations, general health, 250 to 500 milligrams a day. And I give you some values below of some more common foods. More optimal intake, 1,000 milligrams a day. And then some of the data around mental health, specifically, we're looking at 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams a day, specifically as more EPA rich. And this is that. Now that would come from probably from adding omega-3 supplements. And you can see some of the amounts of omega-3s, EPA and DHA within the products themselves here. So of course we have fish oil or algae oil supplements if you don't eat fish or allergic or what have you. Algae is one great way for people who maybe follow a vegan diet, like I said, and they have some great products out there. You can see of course, that's just an example of the DHA and EPA listed in a handful of products. Salmon is going to give you see if you add up those numbers, about 1,800 milligrams for 3 ounces. Sardines, a little bit less, but still great, about 1,200 milligrams. And shrimp, much less, but still a fantastic source of nutrition as well. So one question I get a lot, and I'll bring it up here because I have the picture of it, just says fresh salmon, but people often ask, like, what about wild versus farmed? Are there differences? There are slight differences in terms of the omega-3 content, but the data shows that just eating fish as a whole, farmed and or wild, is amazing, and it's much better than not eating any at all. So I'm not going to say that wild salmon is the only way to go, or wild fish versus farmed. I've had the fortunate experience of I've been to Norway to see some of the salmon farms out there, and the term sounds strange. You've maybe seen images on the internet of like little fish tanks with thousands of salmon piled up on top of each other. It's not like that at all in the well done farms. In the particular example I was in Norway, in the fjords, and there's literally the nets are the size of, I think they said 4 football fields combined. So they are swimming in open water and so on. So both can be great. I just want people to eat more seafood as a whole. Now, more specifically, getting into some other questions around omega-3. So EPA and DHA are specific to seafood and algae. I'll add that one in there. And those are where most of the data are in around EPA and DHA. Okay, that's important when we get into this next discussion, because ALA is a third type of omega-3 that's also really important. But when we start to think about most of the data, and there are, the last I checked, up to about 50,000 research studies on omega-3s as a whole, not on supplements per se, but just on omega-3s as a whole in overall health and well-being. ALA is the omega-3 that primarily comes from non-seafood, flaxseed, chia, walnuts, canola oil, soybean oil, and other sources as well. Yes, it's fantastic, but the conversion of one to the other, for conversion of ALA to EPA and DHA, is very, very low as of now. I just heard about one study that was published that showed it might be a little bit higher than once thought, meaning if I eat walnuts, I'll get some EPA and DHA, but it seems to be a very minimal conversion between those. So,
Chris, we got a question for you.
Yep.
I was just wondering if you still get like the fishy burps if you take an algae supplement over fish oil.
It's a great question. You shouldn't. And admittedly, with fish oil, you shouldn't get those either. You can, of course, I've had that. It's not appealing at all. But one of the things that I used to work with an omega-3 company, and as I started to dig into some of the processing around that, it had to do with partially with the process of producing the fish oil itself. So you should not have that outcome that kind of says that it might be rancid. You should not have those fishy burps. And if you do, then I would actually consider a different product, because there are many out there that are really, really high quality and don't give you that resultant fishy burp, which was a huge turnoff, understandably so, for many people. So I would maybe consider switching products. Algae, again, you shouldn't get that either. And they do have some great high omega-3 EPA and DHA rich algae products that are out there.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Here's some just kind of very practical examples. People ask, I don't even know what to do with seafood. To me, smoked salmon's an easy one. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but lots of different options when we think about how do we include this in the diet specifically. So here's so that those are some different practical options. So I'm going to tell you this other story. So years ago, I was talking about omega-3s, and we think about if you're interested in doing media at any point, TV, radio, whatever it might be, you never know what's going to be thrown at you, specifically when it's live. And I was in, so I worked with a company many years ago, Nordic Naturals. You may have heard of them. I haven't worked with them in years. Still a great company, but so I was in. They were launching their product in Turkey, which was so cool, a cool opportunity. I got to go over to Turkey and did a whole bunch of media, and I did some talks actually to pharmacists there, because in many countries supplements are recommended by pharmacists, by physicians, unlike most in the US. And so I was doing some talks to a group of pharmacists, and then I had some media to do, and I was doing a TV interview, live TV. Now, I don't speak Turkish, and the person interviewing me does not speak English. So we both had the headsets in, and we had a translator in between us. So the TV host would ask a question, it would then be translated to me, and then I would answer the question. So in the meantime, I'm just kind of smiling and nodding as she's talking, like I pretend I know what she's saying, till it's translated. So the first question, we're talking just about omega-3s as a whole, and she's talking to me, and I think that's going to be my first question around those. And she says to me, she says, all right, you're a doctor. This is how it's translated. Can you get injured having too much sex? And now I'm live TV in Turkey, and I'm thinking, okay, there was definitely a translation error here. I'm trying to turn it back to omega-3s. So the idea was, that their star soccer player had an injury, and there were some other concerns about his off the field activities, and that's how that particular question came about. I was able to turn it back somehow to omega-3s, because there are some data. I didn't know what she was talking about. There are some data around muscle and omega-3s, which is how I turned that around, I think. But the point of that story is you never know what's going to get asked on live TV, even when you think you're being interviewed about omega-3s themselves. So
that translator stuff is ridiculous.
it was ridiculous. I was again just trying to smile and nod and thinking, wow, would they need a new translator? Because she definitely got the whatever the question was very wrong. But then afterwards, I did hear why that question came about.
We have a question, hopefully not about that part, but what do you got?
Yeah.
So back to talking about the fishy burps with omega-3 supplementation.
Yep.
Kind of other side effect. I know some people are trying omega-3s, and they heard, I guess, like a rumor or something that it could make their sweat also smell like fish. I didn't know if it was true or.
Yeah. So if you are taking, can your sweat smell like fish? If you are taking a really high dose, there's a potential. And I haven't seen research per se, but really that's from two anecdotal situations, which I'll tell you. It also could make your blood, if you get a blood draw, it could actually smell a little fishy. So two situations with that. I mentioned earlier, I first got interested in omega-3s because my mom has high triglycerides, which is one of the earliest, some of the earlier data on omega-3, on high levels of omega-3s, showing that it could lower triglycerides. So my mom's triglycerides, they should be, what, anybody know what they should be, your triglyceride levels? Less than 200. Yeah, it's actually less than 150. So yes, less than 200 is correct, and technically less than 150. I'm getting to your question as well. There's a story, kind of a weaving the story here. So my mom's, when she was pregnant with me, hers peaked at 5,000, which is, obviously a little bit high. And once then, fast forward, I was in college, grad school, so I was, early 20s, and hers kind of hover around the 500-600 mark, so still elevated. That's when I first started learning about omega-3s, and I talked to her about, adding some to her diet and giving it a try. And the early data showed maybe 4 grams or so of EPA and DHA could be of benefit. So she started taking that, and that was one of the things she had mentioned to me, was that when she would exercise and she would sweat, she'd notice it smelled a tiny bit fishy. Um, I heard that from one of the wrestlers I worked with as well, who had a concussion. That's when I first started working with her. And the data around concussions and omega-3s is potentially taking a pretty high dose for a couple of weeks, up to 9 grams of EPA and DHA. And she had said the same exact thing to me. Now, 4 grams and 9 grams, those are pretty good doses. I haven't noticed that otherwise with, I take about 2-ish grams a day. I haven't ever noticed that. I haven't heard that from other people. But with my mom taking about 4 grams, this wrestler taking 9 grams, I did hear that their sweat smelled a little bit. So it is a potential. And also your blood could maybe smell a little bit as well. Now, was there
Sorry.
another question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you a question. When you
Uh-huh.
talk the context of the DHA and EPA in salmon, is that
Yep.
including the skin? Because like I know here in America, a lot of people remove the skin off of salmon. So does it drastically decrease those values?
Yeah, fantastic question. So it does decrease it a little bit. There certainly is there are some omega-3s within the skin. And specifically the layer of fat between the skin and the flesh, which is just like in humans, like that's an insulator for the fish swimming in cold waters. There are some omega-3s there. So definitely scrape the skin. If you eat the skin, great. But like you said, culturally in America, it's not as common. It doesn't change it tremendously from the numbers I gave you, and I don't know the exact amount, to be honest. But most of the fat is kind of between that layer of the skin and the flesh, and then within the flesh itself. But I think I saw Costco recently selling salmon skins now. So they're maybe starting to get a little popular. I know my one roommate during my dietetic internship, she's Korean and grew up. I remember when she was the first one to introduce me to eating the skin of fish and salmon in particular, because that wasn't something I grew up with, but it is more common in other cultures. Again, there are some omega-3s there, but you'll still getting a ton by eating the flesh and that thin layer between the fish and the skin itself.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. All right. So I think this is important here. We're talking about omega-3s. We're talking about a nutrition fact label, because what do you actually look for? And I'm going to give you 3 examples here. So I'll start on the left. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. Start on the left here. When you look at a facts panel, this is just a more concentrated product that's out there. What I want you to look at if you're taking or considering an omega-3 supplement, there are a few different numbers you see. You said this one says Alaska pollock fish oil concentrate. It gives you a number, 1,250 milligrams. Well, that number is not quite as important. Either is the number right below it, which says total omega-3s as triglycerides as 1,040 milligrams in this particular product. What I want you to look at specifically are the EPA and the DHA amounts. And when we're talking about dosing, those are the numbers we're talking about. The EPA plus the DHA is what you want to consider. Okay, that's an important piece to this equation, because the data isn't on just the total random fish oil concentrate number. It's on EPA and it's on DHA. So you can see this particular product is fairly high in both of those. Of course, they have some blended products, which, as you can see, the numbers there a little bit lower in omega-3 specifically. That particular one, EPA and DHA, has about 170 milligrams only. Or what I don't want you to do, and with that, goes with any supplement, this particular one on the right has a proprietary ingredient list, which means they throw a whole bunch of stuff together under a list of proprietary, but don't give you amounts, because then you don't actually know how much of the thing you're taking. And that goes with any supplement. You want to know how much of each ingredient you're taking. If it's hidden between under a proprietary label, you don't have those numbers. And it's very common in the supplement industry for companies to do this, but they don't. Again, you could use lots of really popular ingredients, but you don't know if the person doesn't know the amount, then it's not giving you the information that you really need. Now, this question came up earlier about what is my omega-3? How do I know what it should be? And there's a couple different ways to get your blood test that you could send out for a kit. They send you a kit in the mail. You do a little finger stick, put some drops on an index card, send it back, and they'll give you your number. If you go to your doctor, get a blood draw, most lipid panels aren't going to include this basic one. But there are some data showing that most people, again, have a higher omega-3 index in the higher cardiovascular disease risk category. What the blood draws do is they measure your serum levels of EPA and DHA and your red blood cell membrane phospholipids. So gives you an idea to evaluate your baseline omega-3 status. And it will give you the number in percentages so you can see if you're at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease, for example, intermediate or desirable risk. So one of the reasons you want to understand your omega-3 level to see if it's something you should be adding to your diet, and if it's something that could be beneficial. Like we said earlier, like I said, it certainly is for most people. So one of the and I could email this, but the one that's coming to mind, there's a link, is omega3test.com. Is a reputable one, and the other brand name is Omega Quant. So those are two. They're using the same technology essentially, but those are two ways if you're interested. I don't know the cost, admittedly, I don't recall, but you can get those done through either of those places. All right, I know we're getting to the end here of almost an hour, so don't want to take up too much of your time here. Go a few more things around this, and then we'll again open it up for questions. We talk about cardiovascular data, certainly some brain health. There's some other benefits though that are interesting around omega-3s. One is with potential muscle health and regeneration. Again, some of this data is early. There's only been a handful of studies, but playing a role potentially in skeletal muscle healing and regeneration, positively affecting systemic inflammatory response to injury. Again, even some data showing it may improve musculoskeletal health related to sarcopenia, which is pretty interesting. Sarcopenia, you may be very familiar. Basically a loss of muscle mass, function, or strength. It seems to accelerate and can start as early as your 40s with up to 50% of muscle loss by age 80. Certainly that would affect basic activities of daily living. And we start to look at some of the other effects of that. We start to look at hormonal changes and less motor neurons, less activity, nutrition can all play a role in sarcopenia. I'm not saying omega-3s cure it by any means. There's so many other things like protein intake and resistance training and so on. But really interesting that this could play a role as well. Overall muscle mass and strength could be affected and could be impacted by omega-3s themselves. One review on omega-3s looking at skeletal muscle mass and strength showed they're necessary to prevent sarcopenia, like I mentioned, or reduce the risk, I should say. Increased hand grip strength, increased thigh muscle volume without changing total body fat content. You could read the list here. I won't go through every one of them, but certainly more research is required. This is a smaller area of research within the omega-3 body of data, but I still think it's interesting to keep an eye on. We just know that omega-3s are beneficial for every cell within your body, which is how this probably came about, and some of the thoughts around this came about as well. This one is also, it hasn't been studied a ton, but there are some interesting studies and data around omega-3s and exercise performance. Improved blood levels of EPA and DHA led to significantly higher aerobic capacity, may help decrease oxidative stress caused by exercise, and then has the potential to decrease production of inflammatory cytokines and markers of muscle damage themselves. So I do have all the references for these at the very end of the presentation, which I think you guys have access to when I'm all done with this, if you don't already have it, which you probably don't because I didn't send it. Here's another one, muscle strength and or omega-3s and endurance. A 3-month study, so not tremendously long, but certainly to give some baseline information. 12 weeks of omega-3s supplementation resulted in an improved omega-3 index, improved running economy, and also increased VO2 peak. So pretty interesting stuff. This one is particularly interesting, I think, when we start to look at brain health and mood. And when we look at this component of omega-3s, EPA and DHA, the recommendations are about 1 to 2 grams per day, so 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA. And the ratio seems to be important here, being EPA rich, so a 2-to-1 ratio of EPA and DHA together. So this is interesting. Again, this isn't saying if you're on some type of SSRI or some other medication for depression or any other mood disorder that you should stop it and start taking omega-3s. The data actually show the benefit seems to be with concomitant use if you're already using something. In addition to that something, adding omega-3s may be of benefit. Obviously, I always say, when you're thinking about yourself, talk to your own healthcare practitioner. If you're working with clients or working with anybody, same thing. You're recommending they talk to their own healthcare practitioner. I am not at all recommending stopping medications and replacing it with omega-3s. So keep that in mind. This is just some interesting data to keep an eye on, and this data is pretty recent. So several studies within the last 10 years, or less than that even, showing this potential benefit. All right, so in summary, key takeaways. 1, omega-3s are essential fatty acids that must be consumed in the diet. Up to 95% of people do not consume adequate or optimal amounts. And then omega-3s are a necessary part of every single cell in the body, which is why they are so critical. Eat your seafood, eat your, the healthier oils we talked about, nuts and flaxseed, chia, all of those things are great, provide a whole lot of nutrition, way more than just omega-3s. But then I do think there's also a consideration for omega-3s in the diet as well as a supplement. The other piece to this, and I won't get into all the details, but if you're an athlete, if you're working with athletes, we also need to look at third-party certifications on those supplements. But that's a whole nother discussion that I'm sure you've maybe had or will have in the future. So that said, we're just about in an hour, a couple minutes left if anybody has any questions, but I certainly appreciate your time today and talking omega-3s.
Awesome. Let's give Dr. Chris Mohr a hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a few questions in a few minutes, so I'm going to start it off here.
Okay, so we talked about how omega-3 can enhance increase in muscle mass and grip strength, but can it enhance the weight loss, and how?
Great question. Early on, there was at least one study that showed that there was a potential, that was one potential outcome. I admittedly have not seen any follow-up data or new data to support that early suggestion. And I don't know, Dr. Ormsby, if you've heard anything otherwise, but I have not seen anything specific to add to that one study that was done many, many years ago. So I would not suggest it as a weight loss aid per se.
Thank you for answering that. I have another question is, what would be an optimal dose, or what would you suggest for a patient who takes warfarin?
Good question. So if someone's on warfarin or any blood thinner, early on there was more concern with the additional use of an omega-3 while on blood thinners. More recently, the data has shown that it seems to be certainly safe. Again, you're making sure that you are talking to your own healthcare practitioner. But and I don't have remember the exact study off the top of my head, but I know they said up to 4 grams a day of omega-3s still seemed to be safe. But like I said, you are absolutely letting the healthcare practitioner know that you are interested in taking omega-3s if you are on some type of blood thinning medication, because omega-3s have a similar effect. So again, you always want to let the healthcare practitioner, the pharmacist know, et cetera. But it does seem to still be safe from the data that I have seen within kind of reasonable doses. Like I said, the one study I'm thinking of was up to 4 grams, still seemed to be okay.
My question pretty much was just, I know like we talked about like all the benefits of omega-3s and stuff, but like I guess kind of like going off his question, like are there any individuals where you like wouldn't recommend like increasing omega
Omega-3s? Yeah,
absolutely?
good question.
Like,
Admittedly, none that specifically come to mind. And again, if they're like I said, it's always wise to suggest talking to healthcare practitioners if there's something I'm not aware of, in terms of any other blood drug, like drug nutrient interactions. The warfarin is the one that comes up a lot, or the blood thinning medication. But other than that, I'm not familiar. I can't think of anyone that specifically should not add omega-3s. At the very least, I'll say adding omega-3 food sources can always be a great suggestion. It's always a wise idea. In terms of supplementation, though, I'm not that I'm aware of, not that I'm thinking of, but always check with your own healthcare practitioner.
Thank you. I have a question.
Mhm.
Is there an upper limit where you would say no more than that? And if you want to increase your omega-3 intake and supplements, would you say that you like split it, like one portion in the morning, one portion in the evening? Will I take 1 gram of EPA
Mhm.
at the moment? And if I would like to double it, would you say one portion in the morning, one portion in the evening? Doesn't it like,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, good question. So 2 questions there. So one, is there an upper limit? I think was the first question. And I haven't seen the data on triglycerides was kind of the early data showing that a pretty high dose, and it was kind of the range of 2 to 4 grams of EPA and DHA was from kind of the American Heart Association recommendation, or guideline. Some of the data, and I mentioned this earlier, around concussions was for a very short time, taking up to 9 grams a day. Not necessarily with any negative side effects, but that wasn't a long-term use. And I've seen people do that, and again with the wrestler I mentioned having a concussion. But again, I haven't seen long-term data on people adding that as a supplement. I will say some populations like Eskimos, for example, is where a lot of the early data came from, who live on mostly omega-3s from food sources. They're not popping supplements. They're eating seal and they're eating food sources of omega-3s, have a really high intake of omega-3 fats. So do you need to go from one extreme to the other and omega-3 maxing? No, not necessarily. So I don't know that there's an upper limit per se, but at the same time, I don't think more is better. That's why it's important to maybe get your own blood test and see where you are on the on the index level, and then see what might be useful for you. The second question is there a benefit of splitting up the dosing? I have not seen that at all. In the grand scheme of things, even 1 to 2 grams is not a lot when you think of fat intake. So, for example, a tablespoon of olive oil is going to be about 14 grams of fat, and you might use that very easily in cooking, for example. So, I haven't seen benefit or detriment to splitting it up. Though I guess the one detriment would be, will it decrease your compliance because you forget to take it later?
I had 2 questions as well. My first question is on storage of omega-3s. I've seen some of these supplement companies recommend after opening and keeping it in the refrigerator
Mm-hmm.
to reduce oxidation. I don't know what you think about maybe like optimal temperatures, maybe even like for some of these pills. I don't know what you think about maybe a freezer, or you talk about the Eskimos and their
Mm-hmm.
diet. My second question.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
This one was also related to nutrient timing. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
I guess just keeping it with other, like, do you think it's a good idea to keep the omega-3s with like other fat soluble? Like I take a D3K2 supplement. Should I like stack those? Or do you think
Mm-hmm.
supplements?
Yeah, good question. So the first one is storage. If you're taking a liquid fish oil, yes, I would absolutely store it in the refrigerator. It could freeze. You could put it in the freezer too. It's actually not going to freeze. And because so you could do that. Capsules, I don't think you necessarily have to. Wouldn't hurt, but I haven't seen anything that suggests you would have to do that. I would say you wouldn't want to keep it like on the counter in the through a window where there's getting hit with the sun every day, because then that could increase oxidation. So generally, like in your pantry, cooler, darker. Putting it in the fridge or freezer won't hurt necessarily. The other question, I already forgot it.
Nutrient timing.
Ah, thank you. Yes, nutrient timing, taking it with you said like D and K. So it does enhance because it's fat, and in your example, vitamins D and K are both fat soluble vitamins. It may enhance the absorption of those, so that might be a great idea to complement or to taking those together. So just because they're fat soluble vitamins themselves.
Thank you. I was wondering if you said that it was great for the brain, obviously, and that it's good for those with concussion. So what could omega-3s do for those with disorders and like chronic conditions of the brain?
Yeah. So what could they do? The data the data that I've seen around brain health, and that's obviously a very collective term. You can go from everything from Alzheimer's to mood disorders to concussions. Just seem to be that many of those, again, Alzheimer's. So, for example, my dad has Alzheimer's, so I've been following that data very, very closely. Those patients seem to have lower levels of omega-3s within the brain itself. I would guess that might be similar with some other brain disorders. Does that mean that simply bringing up omega-3s will make those diseases go away or cure them? Not at all. But may it have some protective benefits? The potential's there. So for me, if that potential is there, I think it's strong enough to suggest that it would be worthwhile. With concussions, most of the data I've seen has currently been in animals because it's easier to give an animal, a mouse or a rat, a concussion, and then treat them with omega-3s and or use it as a preventative measure or as proactively to see if it could reduce the risk and the damage from the concussion. And it does seem similarly that it may protect the brain in some capacity. Like I said, maybe again, because it's increasing those natural levels of omega-3 or DHA within the brain, somehow that maybe has the brain cushioning or something. I don't know that the mechanisms are all completely figured out at this point, but maximizing or optimizing the fat within the brain and the DHA within the brain seems to be beneficial for any of those brain disorders. Again, preventative, not necessarily. A cure-all, I wish. But the benefits from what I've seen outweigh the risks.
Thanks, Chris. Brilliant talk. I want to ask you one question. I think you're going to know the answer, or I think I know what you're going to say is the answer. But if I were on the football team and I had a high chance, do I need to have omega-3s on board before I get the concussion, or can I take it immediately after? Or is there any data like on that sort of timing of it?
Yeah. So the data seems to be that ideally you're going to have it consistently because of that potential protective benefit, somewhat protective benefit. When you're again, if you have a concussion, certainly if you have more elevated levels of DHA and omega-3s within the brain, it may have a protective benefit. There was a study done at Ohio State many years ago, and they did actually show that the players who had omega-3s consistently, there was a lower, and I'm going to misquote this a little bit, but in general, there was a lower rate of concussions than those who did not have it. I could try to find that study and send it to you to share or to read through, but I think having that consistent dose would be beneficial. And then again, if someone does have a concussion, again, this is not a cure-all or total prevention. There are some possible data where a higher dose for a short period of time may be of benefit. But always talking to the team doc, the internal health staff to talk through how to do that And then always also taking third-party certified if you are, in your example, on the football team or any team for that matter.
Yeah, that's great, Chris. I really appreciate that nuance because when we are speaking about these topics and you don't know the answer, this Dr. Moore sort of qualifying every single statement. It may do that, but that's how it is in the real life. All right, let's give him a big round of applause.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. I'll follow up. I owe you one. Appreciate your time.
Sure. Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.